U.S. President Donald Trump says that he will raise tariffs to 25% on cars and trucks from the European Union that are heading for the United States. On his Truth Social platform, Trump wrote that the European Union is not complying with our fully agreed to trade deal. Later, when asked by reporters about the increase in import taxes, Trump accused the EU of failing to honor last year's trade agreement with the U.S. He did not detail the alleged violation. Here's what Trump said before departing the White House for Florida.
The trade deal with the European Union, they were not adhering to it, so I raised the tariffs on cars and trucks to 25%. That's billions of dollars coming into the United States, and it forces them to move their factory production much faster. We have right now in the United States over $100 billion of car plants being built. It's a record. We've never had anything like it from all countries, Japan, South Korea, by the way, Canada, Mexico, they're all building plants in the United States. But the European Union was not adhering to the deal that we made.
All right, I want to pull in now Garret Martin. He's Director of Graduate Studies at the Department of Foreign Policy and Global Security at American University. Garret, it's good to have you with us on this Friday. I mean, were you surprised by this latest tariff move by the U.S. president?
Well, surprised, yes and no. Surprised by the timing, but it's certainly not the first time that he's dangled such a weapon. We, of course, can remember it wasn't that long ago that Greenland was a subject on everybody's lips, and that tariffs had been, threatened against a number of European countries. So the timing is surprising, but the fact of trying to use that commercial leverage isn't so.
Do we know what authority allows the president to impose these tariffs? I mean, I was looking at the reports, and there seems to be kind of a fog here about exactly what authority he has.
Well, the president does have a wide authority, and he can invoke different pieces of legislation. My understanding is that he's trying to invoke Section 232, which was used for steel and aluminium, and it's basically justifying on national security grounds, which is always somewhat surprising. So there are tools that he can use ever since the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs earlier in the year.
Trump has also now threatened to pull U.S. troops from Germany. You can add Italy to that list and Spain as well. Is he just lashing out? Is he in a bad mood, or do you think that he would actually follow through on these threats?
Well, he's certainly lashing out. I mean, that's absolutely clear. We also have the evidence from the leaked email from the Pentagon, which suggested some measures against Spain, some measures against the UK as well over the recognition of the Falklands. So that's certainly the case. But there is obviously precedent. I mean, in July 2020, President Trump had also threatened to withdraw troops from Germany. Now, that didn't happen because his term ran out. So I don't necessarily think that it's going to happen now because of a variety of reasons, especially that the Pentagon is quite busy with the war at present. Mm-hmm. But even if it doesn't go through, there's still a negative impact on the relationship of even bringing up this idea in the first place.
And what about the ability of the United States to project power here in Europe, but also in the Middle East and in Africa? I mean, that ability would be compromised severely if he were to shut down the bases that the United States uses, wouldn't it?
Well, absolutely. I think there's not always an understanding that those bases are not just an act of charity. Of course, there is a deterrence value towards Russia, which certainly is important in this context. But it has been a cornerstone of force projection in the Middle East and Africa for the United States for decades. And of course, as we all know, the U.S. has been quite busy in conflicts in that part of the world. So it would be really shooting yourself in the foot for the United States to do so. Now, could it still happen? Yes. But in terms of a sort of realistic, pragmatic look at the cost benefits of it, it would be a surprising move.
The war against Iran entered its 60th day today. And I'm sure you're aware there is the War Powers Resolution that requires the president to seek congressional authorization for military campaigns once they've reached 60 days. I mean, the legislation, the law is clear about that. The Trump administration says it doesn't count this time. Do you understand what the loophole there is?
Well, so the War Powers Act has been, unfortunately, not quite as effective as it had been hoped when it was imposed in the 1970s in the context of the Vietnam War. There are a variety of reasons. Different administrations have argued that it's not really a conflict, that it's a policing act. I mean, to be fair, Democrats and Republican presidents, Barack Obama did the same over the operation in Libya. I think, secondly, having a power and using it is not the same. Congress has not necessarily shown a great willingness to challenge the president, especially within his own party. So for a variety of reasons, the War Powers Act is not as effective as its instigators had hoped it would be.
Is this an example of Congress failing in its responsibility to provide checks and balances on the power of the executive?
It is. I think it is. And it is also a fact of Congress has been, especially when it comes to decisions around use of force and war, has been much more content in letting the president take the heat, right? Because in a way, if they exercise that power, they are responsible as well. And so there's an element there where Congress, I think, has been generally more so in this current context, if we think about the relationship towards executive power and the Trump administration. But it has been a historical trend that over questions of war and hostilities, there's been excessive deference towards the president.
Garret Martin, good to get your take on things. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us on this Friday. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And our coverage continues now. We want to go to our Brussels correspondent, Rosie Burchard. Rosie, good to see you. I mean, this has come as a bit of a bolt, the announcement on these 25% tariffs on European cars and trucks. I mean, it just came almost out of nowhere, didn't it?
It came out of nowhere insofar as we were not expecting any announcements on trade. But I would say there's been a couple of days in the EU of kind of bracing for some sort of retaliation. Because if you recall, just a couple of days ago, Germany's chancellor suggested that the United States was being humiliated by Iran. And there was a moment, a kind of intake of breath, thinking, OK, well, that is something which is not going to go down well in Washington. And how might the US respond? First of all, we had those threats, as you mentioned, from Donald Trump to withdraw US troops from Germany. And I think there will be some speculation as to whether these latest threats on tariffs are a kind of follow-up in response to those comments from the Chancellor. That has not been declared on the record by anyone, not the President of the United States himself. But I would not be surprised if there might be some discussions going on behind closed doors of whether Merz really needed to say that, given how much we know the President is likely to respond by lashing out.
And if we look at the calendar, I mean, it is the 1st of May, May Day. It's a holiday across much of Europe. But despite that, there has been some reaction to the news of these tariffs. What can you tell us?
So the EU has come out with a statement saying that it is committed to implementing the US trade deal that it was agreed last year. Now, that was hashed out in August last year. And under that deal, the US agreed to cap tariffs and the EU agreed to lower lots of tariffs on the United States as well. But on the EU side, the lawmaking work has been going on in the meantime. That means that the EU has not actually fully implemented the deal yet. So when Trump says the EU is not complying, there is some sort of accusation from the United States, or the reason the EU has been slower on it is because lawmakers paused some work earlier this year when the United States started making threats over Greenland. That paused the legislative work. It has now come back into force, but we do know that the United States has been angry for some time that the EU has been slower to fulfill its side of the bargain.
And we're not saying here that the European Union doesn't have recourse power here. I mean, what kind of action do you expect EU leaders to take?
First of all, they will be trying to cool the tensions and they'll be hoping that these threats don't actually come to pass. You know, we've had threats in the past that have not been implemented. But you can see also very carefully in this EU statement, they have said they have options on the table. Now, the EU has prepared a list of possible counter tariffs that it could basically just pull the trigger on at any moment. Those include kind of standout US products, things like bourbon, things like US soybeans. And so they could go in with some counter tariffs, but then of course we might see some sort of escalation there back and forth. forth. If it got even further, there is a big tool the EU has, sometimes known as its trade bazooka, which can really hit hard. Things like restricting intellectual property rights, restricting foreign direct investment. There will be debate among EU leaders about whether it's the time to use that, but I would be very doubtful that they would start to use that straight away. That's something they will try to reserve and say, look, it's on the table and we can hit back if we need to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's got to be some reluctance to do that. I'm just thinking about the economic situation here in Germany. I mean, the country is struggling to get any GDP growth at all. I can't imagine that Europe's largest economy would be jumping up and down in favor of using that bazooka against a major trading partner like the United States.
Yeah, and that is such a classic debate within the European Union because different countries have different levels of exposure to these tariffs. Germany is really highly exposed. Think about the German car industry. These latest threats really go directly to the heart of that automotive industry. France, on the other hand, is slightly less exposed and is usually much more out there saying, OK, let's pull the trigger, let's go tough here. And you will see those kind of debates playing out once again between EU member states. But you're quite right to say this is a moment where, look, they don't want to rock the boat. Their citizens are also feeling the fallout of this war in the Middle East. They're looking ahead to a summer where a tourism industry may be heavily impacted. That is key to the economy of many European countries as well. And they don't want to have any additional uncertainty.
Yeah, the timing could not be worse. I'm sure many are thinking that tonight. Rosie Burchard for us in Brussels. Rosie, as always, thank you.